Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We request once again to please be seated so that we can start our presentation. Thank you very much for all of those who are here to see the results of the monitoring report of affected territories by illicit crops in Colombia in the year 2021. Next, we will introduce the update of the study done by the SIMSI of the Office of the UN ODC for the Andean region and the Southern Cone. Through the implementation of the monitoring well plan of illicit crops, the Office of the UN against the crimes and crops and for the Southern Cone, they work in alliance with the most affected countries to monitor the extension and the evolution of the illicit crops. The integral monitoring system has promoted a vision of the problems of illicit crop based on the studies of the territories as a scenarios where you have diverse characteristics that facilitate or limit the sustainability. This vision has actually been working to have a monitoring system that not only yields figures but also offers complementary information to facilitate the integral understanding of this phenomena. The results that we introduced today actually correspond to the census of the cocoa crop done by satellite monitoring and overflight as cutoff date of December 31st, 2021. We would like to meet all the people who are now connected from the Ministry of Justice and Law and the Office of the UNODC for the Andean region and the Southern Cone, and through the webpage of the Ministry of Justice and Peace. In presenting the report, in the main table, we have Dr. Inivan Osuna Patina, the Minister of Justice and of Law, Mrs. Candace Welch, the Director General of the UNODC for the Andean region and the Southern Cone, Hernando Chindoy, leader historically of the Inga people, and Gerardo Pesan Ororio, a historic leader of the black communities of Huaco. Also, we expect Nidia Quintero, representative of the National Federation of the Farming Union of the Campesino movement of cocoa planters. We actually invite you to follow us in the Twitter accounts minjustice.co and of the UNODC for the Andean region and the Southern Cone at at Grocol. You could also interact with numeral coca crops. We do request, please, to put your mobile phones in silence and to keep them so that we do not affect the recordings of the media. We will now start this with a greetings from the Ministry of Law, Nestor Ivan Osuna Patiño. Good morning. Mrs. Candice Wells, Regional Director of UNODC for the Andean region and the Southern Cone. Mrs. Nita Quintero, that I know that she's arrived there, and she is the representative, the federal representative of the farming movement of the coca crops, COCAMP, Hernando Chindoy, and then we have the Inga problem, and Mr. Gerard Hauson, the historic lead of the Guapi, Camilo Umaña, Vice Ministry of Policy, and the people who are associated for the drug affairs of the Ministry of Gender, Leonardo Correa, Regional Coordinator of the monitoring system of the SIMSI method, Mr. Germán Andrés Clavijo, the coordinator of the CIG of the SIMSI project, General Tito Castellanos, director of the anti-narcotics divisions. Ladies, gents, friends, all, I would like to greet at the importance of the Office of the UNODC, a body that has actually developed a census of this coca crop since 1999 and has developed multiple studies in respect of the practices of crops in alliance with the observers of Colombia, of the Ministry of Justice, and other institutions of the Colombian government, of which we have an array of information that is very valuable, that it becomes very relevant for public policy. It is precisely the technical evidence, the starting point in building a new drug policy. which is what this government is committed about, that actually contributes to the consolidation of peace in Colombia and building from social justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. The reports and the results that we will see today by the UNODC, that today will be shared with the national and international community. I don't want to uh, mention what is associated in the report, but I would like to make a comment after it's been presented. But it's not a sample, a visible sample, and evidence of the failure of the war against drug. One will evidence also that the vulnerabilities have been and continue to be decisive factors that facilitate that the phenomena of illegality persist in the territory, and you increase the dependence of the communities of these illicit economies. I wish to insist, at any rate, at the fact that the national government is formulating, design, and execute a new drug policy that does not include the legalization of cocaine, does not include that. Be that change is possible, that at some time in the world may come about. Perhaps one day, commerce, production, and trafficking of cocaine had a regime similar to alcohol, could be, but that's not an immediate affair, and this government is not interested and is not going to promote or modify the legislation pursuant to legalizing cocaine. The policy, the anti drug policy of the national government, goes in another sense. It actually pursues aspects of facilitating the territory, non penal treatment to farmers, the farmer crops, substitution of crops, the need for change of a drug policy. And I wish to reiterate once again emphatically, to generate tranquility and then you have here for the country, that we are not going to legalize the commerce and the trafficking of cocaine. It is not the time, it is not the place, and we are not interested in it. But fine, this initial greeting, what it seeks is actually to provide a welcome to our allies, friends of the UNODC, to listen to the report, to thank them for all the statistics that they do supply. These are not flattering data. You will see it, and saying that we do share the ideal of a world in peace, a world with more tranquility, with greater prosperity, and in that sense, we understand and we back that effort, physical, complex, that this international agency performs, and continue to very probably to work with us, helping us in so many affairs in the future. So simply welcome to this session of the report. Let's listen to it, and then we will make some comments also. Thank you very much, Mr. Ministry of Justice and Law, Mr. Osuna Patiño. Now the words of Candice Welch, the Regional Director of the UNODC for the Andean region and the Southern Cone. Mrs. Welch, please, if you may. A good morning on behalf of the UNODC for the Andean region and the Southern Cone. I would like to greet especially Mr. Nestor Osuna, Minister of Justice and of Law, Mr. Enau Chindoy, Historic Lead of the Hindoic Police, Mr. Gerardo Bazana Ruz, Historic Leader of the Black Communities of Guapi, Mr. Camilo Eduardo Umaña Hernandez, Vice Minister of Criminal Policy and Restorative Justice, Mrs. Gloria Maria Mirandez Espitia, Director of Policy of Drugs and Associated Ones, and all the other people present that are connected here. Thank you very much for your participation, and to hear the findings of the coca crop survey corresponding to the year 2021. In 2022, UNODC created the strategic view for Latin America and the Caribbean, pursuant to the objective of having a current approach of the world problem of drugs, organized crime, transnational at that, corruption, and to improve the prevention of the crime and penal justice. As part of this strategy, we created the Office for the Andean Region and the Southern Cone, ROCOL. The experience of UNODC in Colombia means an important link in continuing to face this challenge. As of 2003, UNODC does the follow up of the territories with coca crops in such a way that it's jointly with the Ministry of Justice and Law and the institutions associated with it. During this time, we have observed many transformations in this phenomena. For example, drug trafficking of the cartels is different to that of the armed groups, and the drug trafficking of today is different from the drug trafficking that we had 5 years ago. In 2021, we had an increase in the area planted of 43%, reaching to 204,000 hectares planted, the highest figure of all the series. In the increase of the area indicates the existence of the new players who have not actually gotten to their most productive age, and for this very reason the planted area increased in a greater proportion than the potential production. Keeping in mind the aforementioned, we estimate that the potential of production is 1,400,000 1,400 tons of cocaine. Once again, the highest figure in the 22 years of monitoring of UNODC. The production of cocaine maintains its growing trend, a situation that has been consolidating since 2014, and it is originated in the agricultural practice performed to optimize the production of the coca leaf, a greater capacity to extract the cocaine from the leaf, as well as the great amount of lots that are in highly productive stages of the crop. These practices have been seen in the majority of the regions with the presence of coca crops, but above all in the productive enclaves, where there was the 41% of the total of area with coca in 2021. The confirmation of these productive enclave is consolidated as one of the strategies of these outlaw groups in order to generate profits that actually facilitate their illicit acts. The data shows that the coca crops continue to be in exactly the same territories with conditions of durability. It was identified that 62% of all crops is actually in three provinces of the country: Nariño, Norte de Santander, and Putumayo. Also, 45% of the total of the crop is actually in 10 municipalities. And in these regions, in prior regions, we reported a reduction in the area with cocoa, and the intervention was concentrated in forced reduction. The difficulties to sustain these types of mechanisms and the lack of complementary measures that actually managed to change the vulnerability conditions contributed to the increase of areas planted in 2021. For this very reason, it is necessary to design mechanisms with differentiated actions with each territory that involve all territory so that they can promote the rural development accompanied by the stability and security that is required by the communities to transit from illicit economies to licit economies. As per the World Report on Drugs published by UNODC this year in the areas where you have forced to eradicate, in spite of the fact have an initial reduction there, the coca comes back quickly to the prior places before the interventions. The crops and the cocaine production continue to increase to threaten the cultural identity of the peoples. There's around 50% of the coca is located in areas of special management. A high percentage is concentrated in the lands of black communities and in areas of forest reservation. Therefore, the creation of strategy that have in mind the potential to ecological and cultural one of the country shall be essential to assure the sustainability of the future generations in these territories. I wish to insist on the point of sustainability because, in spite of the fact that it were to be possible to find mechanisms to eliminate all the coca leaf in Colombia, the task will only be finished when the territory, the communities, and the institutions are transformed and are capable of generating conditions that are prone for the development. And then we have, in this sense, then we have for a rural development, we will develop them with licit crop that brings prosperity to the community. It is necessary to have an intervention where you guarantee a process of transformation, like the projects of alternative development that strengthen the social fabric and promote the licit economies. From UNODC, we have started the broadening of the monitoring system to go over and beyond the variables that actually measure the potential production of cocaine. Now we monitor indicators of access, of economic dependence, community participations, the present institutional presence, among others, which will be useful data to measure the evolution of these territories. Today, we can actually claim that the increase that we have had in areas and production is the result of the changes that drug traffickers are experimenting in the country and in the world. The increase of global demand of cocaine, the implementation of the full peace agreements, the persistence of the factors of territorial vulnerability, and the economic crisis, among other factors, are creating new conditions for the production of drugs in Colombia. The cocaine was integrated in productive enclaves that are more efficient and functional for drug traffickers, and the criminal players, have diversified and they have had important changes in the way in which the illegal money is becomes in goods and services. This situation should be monitored and understood so that we create new ways of overcoming them. Finally, I wish to reiterate the commitment of UNODC to continue to work in an articulated fashion with the Colombian government in the challenges that it represents the global policy against drugs, seeking development alternatives that guarantee for the communities opportunities that are sustainable in time. For that, UNODC expects to accompany the Colombian government in the follow up and monitoring of the territories with the presence of illicit activities and with the design of objective indicators that offer evidence about the progress in the territorial transformation and the achievement of the objectives of sustainable development. Thank you very much. Mrs. Welsh, thank you very much for your intervention. Next, you will be addressed by Hernando Agio Chindoy Chindoy, historic leader of the Inca people. Inca people, I'm sorry. Akaripangi Chi, Akaripangi Kudui Kuramanda, Anipunche, Anji Chileai Kutui, Gune Chimay Picaspaki, Iskai Mirai Caipiringa. Speaking in Native American language. Right, thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for the venue that you are providing to be heard. Our colleague Gerardo, he is a historic leader of our black communities. I'd like to welcome him too. On our behalf, we wish to express first a thanks for being a company in these studies that we have performed, and the Ministry of Justice to accompany us to go in a technical manner what for a long time we have been doing around these problems of being affected by illicit, so-called illicit crops. I'm going to concentrate on my intervention a bit in expressing our opinion in and around the fact that Native American peoples, First Nations, have had more than 20 years. We have been stigmatized by the presence of these crops, that it's not because we wished for them to be there, no, but actually the very adverse situation in which we have found ourselves in the midst of the conflict has ended up being part of these curses. And this doesn't mean that we have not made efforts from our own will to try to be freed from them. And we think that we have been doing some of those examples 20 years ago, Noriño, Putumayo, were the provinces with the greatest presence of these type of crops. Nothing has changed there, but there too we have developed very significant development to be able to overcome this, not by via force, not by spraying, but by of touching the hearts, that touching of hearts between the physical side of people and the spirituality, and there we have found a response to overcome our own suffering when the state has actually come with the bombings through police or the army, and when the armed groups of guerrillas, of paramilitaries, or criminal gangs in their different times of our history, we have also answered with our words, not with violence, but with our spirituality, and that is how we have overcome them. In Nariño, we started with our peoples when we freed a total of some 3,600 people that eradicated and stopped living depending on more than 2,500 crops of poppy at that time, and that's when we started that process so that we can progress. In the case of coca, in the coca case, we have the case of Unguillo in the province of Putumayo that actually overcame this problem with a population with more than 1,500 people in the neighborhood, in the area, and more than 15 years there, they have more land of 55,000 hectares free of that crop. It means that yes, it is possible to overcome this situation when the community is on your side and when communities are heard in their proposals. And also, additionally, we wish to express here, Mr. Minister, that here in Colombia we have more than 10 exercises that have been forgotten in their own rights and so on, in the indigenous parts, the Afro side or the farming side. And today it would be very important to actually have that as of these exercises, which are the exception in the Colombian case, that we could have a general rule in the case of the country, because there we have responses in overcoming these crops economically, socially, culturally, environmentally. We are here in the case here of articulating our actions of our fight in terms of educated, articulated to the use of new technology. We have said that just as we use drones to find theirs to our crops and so on, to our territories, why not to use those drones to be able to take out products that are processed good in the same territories when they do setup of small companies therein, where there are no roads, where mobility is through rivers or walking and taking their on horseback or on our human backs. Why not use them to actually take those products to the points where we can actually concentrate them, so the very airports that are not that far away and they actually can get there. The products are transformed. It's much easier to transport them, and they have far greater value. So the value is actually go fourfold in terms of price. And when we take that to the international world, actually the prices can even improve even further. So there, women, youngsters, and so on that are being they're attacked by the use or being captured by the armed groups. They have a response to be able to go away from them so that they can find another opportunity in life of the people in their respective territories. So it's regrettable that our women today in our studies show that a high percentage of them, almost 50%, are mothers being younger than 18 years of age. That is frustrating very much the progress in the development of capabilities with them and so on. And then we have here to create also our own university, also, Mr. Minister. We're going to create this university officially by the end of November, and in a meeting that we will congregate more than 500 delegates of the Inga world. They will do this official creation of this university institution because we wish to develop our capabilities to the highest level, and then we have them for the worlds of the worlds, and then we have them there for the country so that we can give that jump. And we think that we're convinced that education articulated with the traditional knowledge and science there can generate responses in these type of matters of overcoming the drug policy and this coming of time. We wish to express that at the end, for the indigenous people, in particular for the countries of the south in Nariño, where we have the greatest number of peoples that have been there in physical culture. There's we are actually physically and culturally being examined. It's very important that we materialize these life plans that the Constitutional Court has ordered. That, however, we have had more than 10 years, and today we have not been able to materialize. We hope to actually service these issues for them and with us, and in that measure, giving our hands between Afro communities and farming communities and all the peoples that live in those territories, we would be able to articulate once again to live well with the territory. If water finishes, if resources are finished that give us life, not only are we going to be affected, we're going to have all peoples are going to be affected, the people there's, and all of humanity in the world. So we believe that from there, from the cultural identity and their own thought that for many years we have developed so that nature and communities can work together, and those knowledges that we have in the languages, in the communication codes that we speak can be revitalized to actually give a proposal to come out ahead. Thank you very much, and very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chindoy. Very grateful for your intervention. Next, we would listen to Gerardo Bazan Orobio, historic leaders of our black communities of Guapi. Once again, Mr. Bazan, good morning. On behalf of the ethnic peoples and of the black communities of Colombia, we'd like to thank very much to this venue, to the Ministry of Justice, to the Office of the UN, and all the ones that somehow made it possible, this type of exercise. I wish to start by saying that in good time, the President decides to retake the agreement, the peace agreement, for us that is key, because from that peace agreement many aspects depend that have to do with our development as black communities. That in Colombia we have a presence and a significant participation. We have contributed to building this country, and we are subjects of law within the framework of the implementation of this process. It seems to me key to be able to progress in the implementation in decisive aspects. One, it is evident the need to progress in the program that has to do with substitution of crops. That we think to be decisive for the purposes of being able to work hand in hand with the communities and with them to be able to determine their routes and the mechanisms to be carried out. We in the Pacific, especially in the Middle Pacific, we have been participating in everything that is associated with the implementation of the agreements, everything that has to do with point number one and the progress against the BEDEP. I wish to take this venue to notify our concern because the BEDEP in the Middle Pacific, it is the most backward of the ones. Of the 16 PEDEP is the one that less progress has had. And to our accounts, we believe that we have been able to progress in 0.5%, when there are other areas in the country that actually are between 11 and 14%. I think that that is a discriminatory action that does not correspond to the situations or the specificity of the Pacific on the Cauca and Valle del Cauca provinces. So I'd like to invite you to review and to retake that process. I wish to back that in this process that we have performed with the UN and the Ministry of Justice, we have been able to bring around a brotherhood of joint work. If we have seen, yes, that these type of policies are defined nationally, for us it is important what we have been doing for the past 6 years with this theirs, because we have been enabled us to know the territory, to see the specificities of the territory, and from there to have an array of initiatives that we find to be necessary, of which we call in particular, so that jointly with this pilot experience we can actually progress in the implementation and offer alternatives in respect of the affectations of the illicit crops in Colombia. Well, right. This, for us, just as the indigenous communities and farming communities, it is decisive and key to have the support of the state through the ministry and the UN. What it means is that to generate venues, we have to generate an entire process of articulation that enables us to progress along those lines. Lastly, it is important for us to, in that process that may be carried out, to bring about the state oriented so that we can have these people for the zones. So it's not the idea in the case of the substitution of crops to do an exercise where we give some resources. Those resources should be accompanied with a social component, with a team of people that actually accompany the communities, and that those orientation enable us to define certain process, agro-industrial processes geared toward other uses of the cocaine leaf. The cocaine leaf for our communities has medicinal uses that could very perfectly go more in depth and broaden, so that we can reorient and not be only for coca paste, that we obviously know that has some important harm into the world's population. So we reiterate our thanks, and we invite everyone so that we can do through all these exercises that we could somehow progress in strengthening the processes in our communities and ethnic communities nationally. Mr. Arroyos, thank you very much, historic leaders of the black communities of Guapis. And lastly, you will be addressed by Nidia Quinterio, the representative of the Federal Federation of the Farming Community Unions of Coca Crop Growers. Doña Nidia, please, next. Thank you very much. Good morning. Would like to thank Dr. Gloria Miranda and their team, the ministry, for the opportunity that we have to be able to put our proposals and our ideas in these very important venues. We also like to thank the historic moment that we are living in the country, where opportunities are being opened to progress in a certain and assertive way in consolidating peace and reconciliation among Colombians. For us, farmers, that are organized, that have been immersed in the process of the economy of cocaine in the distant territories of this country, rest assured that it is very important what we are being able to do. All the support, all the accompaniment from the UN, and all the will that is being expressed by the institutions now to provide continuity to the implementation process. We, from the farmer communities, organized farmer communities first, the 100 families that signed the will to substitute this more than 5 years ago, and the other more than 200 families that are still in the economy of the cocaine have not been able to have access to the commitment in the agreement, have all the willingness uh, to progress in giving solutions to these problems. We are 100% sure that the only solution is to find other alternatives in the economy. And for that, they are with all the willingness to be able to achieve the substitution of the economy. In that sense, what we have seen, the points that we have considered important to work with, first is to check or review the progress that we have had, the progress we have had between the hands, the government, the institutions, and the farmers who are producer farm. And then second, the check, the review of the institutions already created for implementing the peace agreement. And there are many norms and laws that were created in these 5 years, but they are not articulated amongst them. So it is necessary to have review and an articulation of them so that they're harmonic, so that they meet, and that allows us to be able to understand in a better way. Another element is, in order to have true possibilities of substituting the crop, we need to implement the rural integral reform jointly with point number 4 of the peace agreement. And lastly, during these 5 years that have passed, and according to the current status of the implementation and the serious problems of violence that has actually accentuated as of late in the deterrence for us, it's all a very sad reality. It is necessary that in that agenda we keep in mind the direct participation of the productive families, of the producing families, that they have direct conversations in the territories with the families involved in the economy of cocaine, and that be rest assured that they're all more willing to progress to substitute. Always, the state will need to guarantee their economic stability and the access to the fundamental rights that have always been denied for all these families, which is one of the reasons why they had to end up in this black economy. This the other issue is the issue of violence. Now we have to, somehow the state has to find an alternative or the solution to the serious problems of violence that we have in the territory, so that the families can start to develop their activities freely. We have many organizations, many families, many communities that are actually confined because of violence. That has to be a priority to be able to give solutions to these serious problems. At any rate, we do consider that it is very, very important this instant that we are living, which is the solutions to the problems. It is the true channel, the dialogues, conversation, the finding of solutions should be a commitment of all Colombians. For that very reason, from the very farming nation, the scrapers, organizations, communities in general, they have all the willingness. Count on us to continue to progress on the count on us in building pieces. Thank you very much. Doña Nidia Quinterio, representative of the National Federation of the Union of the Farming There's of the Farming Minutes of Coca Growers. Thank you very much for your intervention. We're thankful for all the members of the world. And now we're going to give the technical presentation of the report of the coordination of the integrated one of illicit crops, Leonardo Correa. Leonardo, please. Thank you very much. Good morning. Allow me to start this presentation speaking a bit about the conditions under which we are doing this monitoring exercise, not only in this year, but in the past years. We, I am seeing, can someone help me the presentation? Can someone slide to the next slide? The exercise of monitoring in the midst of environment, Hernando, Nidia, and Gerardo have actually expressed clearly an environment of expectations derived from the signing of the peace agreements. There is a condition in which communities are selling or pending the sale or the buy-in of this evolution of how this phenomena has evolved in the past few years. There's a second element that although there is like 41% of the territory where before we had coca, now it is currently free of coca. That is a very good piece, and we have a lot of territories still. Not only do they have coca, but they actually the vulnerabilities that have facility, the persistence of them continues to be recurrent. We cannot overlook the fact that in the past 3 years we had a very strong increase of cocaine. So it's not something that comes up here in Colombia, but globally there is an increase of the demand for cocaine. We have actually lost them determinately, and then we're furious there how the groups, the illegal ones, and then having the communities, and then they have their transformation. There is an increase in the groups of the territories. I like to say that is a disorder, lack of order when you exercise territorial control in the territories. And then there is another key one. I'm going to go more in depth there with greater incentives to produce coca. There are new ways of generating incentives so that farmers in the territories actually maintain themselves in the production of cocaine. Those conditions, those structural factors are generating three dynamics. We have actually organized in three dynamics. The first, the changes in territorial control. The second is a greater access to transforming monies of drug trafficking of the production, the drug production, and then to transfer that monies in goods and services. I'm going to develop this idea because it's fundamental. In the past, farmers had less opportunities of turning that money into goods and services. Today, that changed for the very fact that the populated centers that are most closer to the cocaine, they offer more things. Today, it's possible to find in these populated centers flower shops, stores, motorcycle stores, far more elements in which you can turn the money into goods and services. And then there's a third element that is key, and I'm going to develop further. It's the trend to concentrating them in productive enclaves. This has generated two universes that are totally different. In one universe, within the enclaves, we have a profile that actually I like to say that it's agro-industrial of the coca. But then outside of them, we maintain this profile, this farmer one, traditional, where coca is actually, we have one, the vulnerability conditions. And then we have the situation, and then the strong development that we have in the ones there, and an increase also in the production there. And then we have on the highest side of the story, and then over there, what we're actually having here, and then we have this data, is this, for you have the transformation of the coca. This one that we have of coca, of the productivity of the coca landlots, I insist, in particular, within the productive enclaves. This increase of productivity is associated with getting to an optimum point of the ones with per hectare, and then we're coming here to the ages, to the most productive uh, age of the trees which are the most productive area they produce the most leaves, and then we have another element where we have a renewal, or there was already a renewal in the past of the productive varieties, and they found varieties in which one, there's greater concentration of alkaloid, two, there is greater leaf production, and third, and this is an important factor, it is easier to extract the alkaloid of the leaf. These three elements have been modified in the past years, in particular in these productive enclaves. Therefore, this, in particular, once you have the product, and there's actually, excuse me for make this differentiation because I think that it's absolutely key in the exercise of public policies to which they're inviting us at this time. The fourth element is that the use of farm products has been optimized. There's better, more efficient use in this use, and there's in particular in the productive enclaves. This is a map that many of you already know, the map of permanence, and I bring it to mind the fact that the increase of coca crops has not been transferred into the expansion towards new territories. In reality, what we're talking about is that the territories that historically have been affected by coca, that you see here in the red, that's where coca is grown. In those very same territories that have been 10 years, 86% of the coca are in territories where coca has been there for more than 10 years. And I invite you here to see the green side, because we can't forget here that there on territories that we have overcome the situation. Hernando was telling us some examples of indigenous communities that have actually managed to overcome effectively these illicit crops from their territories. These are in the green areas, and look how the map is actually filled with these successful cases where we can see how we can actually reduce the coca but actually achieve it to take it out of the territory. Another element that always worries us that 50% of the cocaine is in areas that threaten the biological and cultural diversity of Colombia. But look, in this data, 50%. And actually, let's put it on the prior map. So it's not only 50% today, but actually 50% for more than 10 years. I mean, these territories have been affected for more than 10 years. So we're not thinking here of the fact that in this year, 50% of the coca is here. It's just more than 10 years has been there. That the vulnerability conditions that allow coca to be present there, they're actually more than 10 years there. So here I'd like to only highlight that, whether in parks as well as the Indian reservation, as in the black reservations and farmer reservations, and we have an increase of coca crop. And that scenario, that panorama, being present for more than 10 years in the same territories, and that coca crop threaten our cultural and biological identity. There's, I think, that you can see in the map, the areas, the darkest sides show the areas in which coca is actually closer from one to the other, and those are the enclaves. These are the areas that you see in the dark. Those are the productive enclaves where not only do you have more coca, it's actually there's more stock, but actually the lots are more productive. In those enclaves is where we have introduced other varieties of the crop. It's actually we have a rationalization of the farmers there, and a very important factor, that effect of having them with coca closer to one from the other. It's actually made that lower the production cost. So in other words, the profit margin there is even greater. There's some incentive because the armed groups in those places, they have a different profile, and there they generate different types of incentives. Less cost, but actually better prices for those areas. And there's greater efficiency in the extraction process, but if you see there where the enclaves are, they're clearly associated in the areas where it's easier to do that trafficking, and in such a way that it's a strategic and functional location to trafficking. It's as if actually we can design where we can have the coca this time, and these are the places in where drug traffickers wish to have coca right now and generate greater pressure for the persistence of the coca. So the productive enclave have, and I have actually repeated here, some conditions that are different to the rest of all the affected areas, and that is why in the design we have to consider that it's not the same to intervene the areas within the enclave than outside of the enclave. I just wish to show certain examples in that data. The density of planting is far higher within the enclave than outside the enclave. But look, the capacity to produce coca leaves is actually greater and is actually marked within and outside the enclave. Within these enclaves, within these enclaves, there is a very important percentage of the coca, about 45%. Excuse me, 41% of that one is within there. It's almost half within these enclaves. That's actually breaking our strategies, the way in which we must intervene. And I also mentioned at the beginning the importance of the relationship between the coca areas that we have in our imagining as a rural area, but there's populated centers, and there is a whole set of activities that are illicit activity that begin to have a greater, to be more permeated by the money that comes from the production of coca and drug trafficking, excuse me, the transformation into cocaine. Here you can see a populated center. These populated centers are less than 10 kilometers away from the coca areas. And a very key factor, you actually see here, you see some populated centers that have an asterisk. Those populated centers are within the coca list. Why do we wish to emphasize the centers there within the coca list? Because there is a relationship. The people that actually produce coca and what they do in goods and service says in those populated centers. And then if we have there that we actually find a magical, the one to finish the coke in all these territories, we're going to find not only farmers that actually be left with sources, and then we have there this economy that actually we have it affected for tomorrow, and then we have there, and then we have there to take a cocoa for there. There's an entire wealth, and then we have there. Hmm, uh, because then we can have them goods and services that could be found without needing coca there. And here, I'm going to put here the main alert of this report. Historically, the coca was growing here in the centers, in the productive enclaves, and this is a tendency, not this actually for many years back, and they actually have a graph here in the but the alert comes out because coca actually grew outside of the enclaves. In the prior years, we were actually controlling there, and actually the reduction of coca outside them. Outside, we were actually within there. In this year, our great concern, our great alert, is actually the coca actually grew outside the enclaves as well. And this is, just look at this of the map in the red color. It's not that actually has actually left to other places, but territories that were already affected by coca, now they have more coca, and the transfer of the productive model agro-industrials of the enclaves actually begins to work to all those areas that are not enclaves. That is the greatest alert of our report in our case. In this slide, you can see that 32% of the increase is actually within the enclaves, but in the outskirts, that for us outside is actually 12 kilometers. We had an increase of 33% increase. Actually, in areas that are more isolated, it actually is 35% more. So now our great concern is that we, not only is coca being increased in these enclaves, that we say we're winning the fight outside and we have very specific areas and very concentrated. When we're losing, no, we actually are losing the battle inside and outside of the enclaves. And I wish to close my presentation because I always complain because there's very little time that I have to present it. That in particular this year, it's actually been very complex to actually to put all the information together in only 15 minutes. But I'd like to end with this because the transformation that is happening in Colombia affects not only what actually happens within Colombia, and not only this slide, I'm going to take a bit there and there. You have to have there, if you, because And then we have there that this crop gets to the international markets here in the blue, but also the national markets. It's not only that we have a risk of the of cocaine actually being exported. No, we have a great risk actually staying here, and the incentives are great because I mean, look at following the national market. That X of coca leaves actually actually could be 71x. That's a ton of money. But the main message of this slide is that we can see that what is within the area of the coca area. The coca area, we have the part of the coca leaf, and in certain cases we have the transformation of coca paste, and then we have up to 2x, and that is the money that is moved within the region. But outside is where I have the greatest part of the problem, and here is where we have the greatest part of the incentives. And this makes it that those people who control those parts of the incentives actually has a lot to say about what happens with coca in Colombia. And since it doesn't depend only on the market in Colombia, we're actually seeing the reactions at the level not only in Colombia but outside of Colombia. But you can actually check the press releases, coca crops in several countries in Central America, coca labs of transformation there of the coca paste in cocaine chlorohydrate. I would like to say that almost in all countries of South America, even in countries in Africa, even in countries in Europe, we're beginning to see that this idea of this exercise of transforming the coca paste is actually going outside of Colombia. It's not only in Colombia, and that places us in a scenario in which we are beginning to understand the coca and, and not only in Colombia but in the entire region. Here we have a huge challenge. What we do here is actually going to have some implications at the level of the entire region, and that is what we know. The way that we have actually found to studying this phenomenon is so useful in understanding what is happening in the rest of the region. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are attentive to your questions. Thank you to Leonardo Correa, the coordinator of illicit crops. Next, the minister of there's Osuna Patino will conclude there's the monitoring there affected by illicit crops in Colombia in 2021. We'd like to hear you, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much. As you can actually can appreciate, in the year 2001, we actually had an increase of crops in the increase of coca without precedent in the history of the country. That data, in spite of what's eradicating them in the past years, actually is some 440 hectares of crops, of coca crops. If we continue doing the same that we have been doing in the past 10 or 15 years, the result is not going to change. And we wish to change the trend of that figure. We need to do something different, something new, something novel. I think that we have a roadmap, and this government is absolutely committed to uh, carrying out that roadmap and to catch up on the things that in the past years we have not done in the compliance and the execution of theirs. And that is the peace agreement celebrated between the Colombian state and the FARC some 6 years ago. There we have a policy, an alternative policy in drug production, and we have a policy that actually wants to be executed, and this government wants to put it in execution. And then we have the enclaves here, where to have a report. And then poverty, there's 28 points above than the average of poverty. There's a place there that we have there, and then you don't have enough presence there. And then we have there, and there would be there territorial vulnerabilities. Those territorial vulnerabilities actually favor the. They sometimes impose as survival measures the increase of the coca crops. Right. So in the Congress of the Republic, we have a project that we have here by the Communist Party, and then we have the alternative ones to the coca growers. This government has actually expressed their support, and then we have there of the ones that we have of the media that actually is a bill that we expect to be passed. And then we have there of the effective one there's of goods and assets, goods and services, and then we have there the farming this, and then we have there environmentally sustainable, technically viable, that actually are economically profitable for farmers, and that theirs be socially accepted. This is an enormous challenge, but there we have a roadmap, and we all have the political will. And then we have, and then we have there, to have there to live better. That allows us to live better. We'll continue with the coca crops, so that later we can do some industry with the illicit use of the coca crop, the textile ones, industrial use, and then we have to advance to eradicate the plant. Safe one, Pacific ones, and there for these people, and of course, to the eradication of these networks of money trafficking that we actually have there. There would be essential that this new drug policy has a that actually comes from a popular decision. We are committed in developing at least 4 hearings in respect of drug policy and territorial development to gather the will, the decisions of the communities that are closer to that, and that way, as of then, we can actually do very much more concrete proposal. And then it's actually a matter that is not resolved there. Then we have there, and then I admire their tax. We have to do that. We cannot be there. And then we have their industrial designs with education, with everything that the states and the state of law has actually had in the constitution, and then we have there that we have there they actually breathe not in a perfect way, but actually in a visible way. In this areas doesn't exist. I'm very much obliged for the program of the UN against drugs, and then actually this bringing them to this world of realities, this information that unequivocally is useful to design public policy, to find out what is the terrain that indicates this government, what is the starting point. And above all, I believe that as of this information that is not ideological, that doesn't come from a political party, that is not geared politically, that is not designed there to in the Colombian policy, I think that is a technical information gathered by the UN that actually indicates that effectively the policy, the traditional policy to face these crops and the coca leaves and the production of Colombia was not successful. And we have to find new alternatives that I reiterate for the tranquility of that does not include not in this government did, but a transit towards a illicit use of the coca leaf, towards a willing substitution of crops to the presence of the state in the areas, in these enclaves, where we actually are extending then the potable waters, the education, and a policy in which we actually allows us to progress in forgetting that sea of blood that is not seen in today's statistics, and then we know that it's behind those data, and then in the ones that we have actually can go into forward step that actually stops being our everyday life. So thank you very much to the UN. They give us an enormous data so that we can start working. This is a call from the starting point of where we are, a snapshot to find out where we are so that we know where to go, not so much of hectares of crops. That's one of many indicators, but rather in prosperity, in peace, in tranquility, and also in production of cocaine. At the end of government, we have more flattering data. Thank you very much for the report. Very, very kind of you, Ministry of Justice, and of Lord Nestor Ivano Suño Patiño. We're thankful here for the members of the press to coming to this. As of now, we will start the full report is available on the webpage of UNODC Colombia, www.unodc.org. That's we have. We actually can see the link in the screen. By the outside, you will see the publication. In this way, we have just finished this act in which we presenting the monitoring report of effective territory by illicit crop of 2021 for the transmission there.